Because of violence and hardships in Europe and desperation for power, the white man got curious what was beyond those waters that no one ever crossed. When they crossed those waters, they found the land of treasures that were occupied by redskins. Millions of men, women, and children that have been there for generations. But in history as we know it, the white men felt they had to force these people out to get what they really wanted to be their own, America. In the beginning of the semester, if you can remember reading In As Long as Grass Grows or Water Runs, the author painted a distinct picture of what Indians went through when the pioneers came. The pain and suffering, massacres by thousands, hundreds of unwarranted promises, and inconsistency of the white government really made it hard for the Indians to want to cohabitate with the settlers. The Indian culture and native rituals were never respected by European settlers, and Indians still have issues being heard or respected in American society currently today. 22 years ago, two college students were taking a shortcut along the Columbia River and stumbled on what they discovered to be a skull. They called the police, and shortly afterwards, what they could have just ignored ended up being the most important skeleton found in the United States, the Kennewick Man. After study from James Chatters, a local archaeologist, he went back to the site to discover the entire skeleton. This skeleton was neatly positioned in the location, providing that this was a burial of some sort. After having all the bones together, he discovered that the hip bone had a prehistoric stone spear point inside of it, and after sampling, it was discovered that the skeleton was estimated to being 9,000 years old. Being that the bones were nearly 9,000 years ago, this raised question on who the man was and were Indians really the first ones to live in America. The first archaeologist to study the remains, James Chatters, described the skull as having Caucasoid features, not Asian like they associated Native Americans in the past. A reconstruction of the skull based on Chatters' conclusions looked like Captain Picard after Star Trek, which made the northwestern Indian tribes very upset because they knew the remains belonged to their ancestors. Because of Chatters' Caucasoid theory, others believed that the skull might have belonged to people who migrated from the east across the northern Atlantic ice, as some scientists have suggested, as well from the west across from the Pacific. This set question to the previous theory known as the Clovis theory. According to Skull Wars, the Clovis first scenario suggests that the first Americans arrived sometime during the final part of the Pleistocene. 20,000 years ago, according to Skull Wars, ice covered one-third of the Earth, which made it believed that the first people walked over through the Burlingland Bridge. But today, the question is, who has the rights to these remains? Scientists believe that they did simply to evidence. These skeletal remains represent evidence of another or earlier migration of people into the Americas. They believed they needed to provide scientific knowledge that is of benefit to all the citizens of the United States. By having the remains, they could learn about the past and see who was here first. But the Indians disagreed. They believed in their culture. They stuck by the "we were here first" statement. Ancestor stories passed down in heritages tell them that they have lived here more than 10,000 years and that Native Americans were the first people to live in North America. We were the first ones here, so the bones belong to us, and the bones need to be reburied. By doing scientific research and the government holding the remains, they believed this was not only disrespectful, but this was definitely against the law. Laws such as the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 or even the NAGPRA in 1990. According to the NGPRA, it requires that remains and artifacts be returned to the identified descendants or groups if and when uncovered during activities by archaeologists. Scientists' point of view is archaeology, the study of human history and prehistory through the sites of artifacts and other physical remains. In a New York Times article I read recently, there was an archaeologist complaining about the issues that we're discussing today between archaeology and Indian culture. Mr. Van Horn reported to the reporter, "How are you going to do archaeology and learn about a man's past if you got the state of California burying the stuff as fast as you can find it?" My opinion is that Indians deserve the remains and to rebury them. Knowing that Indians were the first ones here, we need to respect the remains and the trees we have in place respecting their religious rituals. The burial and collection of the bones was a violation of the law. that we established in response to the amount of disrespect they endeavored in history. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. Let's flip roles and just forget this argument and fast forward yourself in the future 5,000 years from now. An archaeologist want to dig the land that your family hold a burial plot. This burial plot your family has had for generations. And just because they stumble on one of these bones, someone passed by your yard, now the scientists feel that it's necessary to dig up your bones and completely disregard and disrespect your family and your burial. This next approach may be a little bit extreme, but I want to make you understand even more on the level of disrespect that these archaeologists went just to prove history that they thought was not true. Say thousands of years from now, a scientist wants to crack open burials and tombs of people that were killed and buried during the Holocaust because they didn't believe it happened. Everyone knows it's happened because it was been taught generation to the next, but the scientists believe that only scientific evidence and investigation of bones can dictate the truth. So they dig up the graves and test bones of victims during the Holocaust. And even though your future descendants are arguing that your bones or your mother's bones or those victim bones should not be tested, they do it anyway. The scientists say that science takes precedence and they must run these tests to verify if the information has been taught years before is true. And then they find out that the information was true. Science overrides being a decent human being? No. It's plain disrespectful. It's against the law. And if you disagree with side with science, keep that energy and pass that to your family that digging up your body is okay. Because one day, we are all going to be a 9,000-year-old bone in the ground.